Let's look at some real life scenarios of Newton's first law. We've just kind of described it theoretically, but let's put it in practical terms. Newton's first law is actually something you are very familiar with, whether you believe that or not. So we're going to go through a few kind of very common examples that a lot of people would encounter in day-to-day life. So we have the LRT, here in Edmonton, and it stopped at Health Science Jubilee. Now the train, it stopped, now it suddenly starts to move forward. So we want to ask ourselves what happens and why. Again, we're going to do my lovely little drawing here. So here's the train car. And now eventually the train car is going to move this way. Now for you, we're going to say you're at this location here. You're nice and happy being there. I'm just going to kind of mark this position with respect to the ground with this blue line. Now, eventually, here's the deal. You're standing at this position in the car, so we're going to say that you're still standing in this position right here. But here's the thing. Newton's first law is all about resisting change, or you want to continue doing what you're doing. If you're kind of standing in this position relative to the ground, you want to stay in that position. So when that car starts to move forward, your body is very much interested in staying in this position. But now that the cars move forward, you still would like to be in this position. So you're going to kind of feel this sensation of moving backwards. And this happens all the time in vehicles. If the vehicles stop and then it suddenly moves forward, especially if you're not braced for it, you'll feel like you're kind of falling back. And that's because your body wants to remain at rest because of Newton's first law. So you feel like you're moving backwards because you want to stay at rest. Scenario 2, all too common for teenagers, especially when you're learning to drive. And most of us have been in this situation, especially if you're in Edmonton and on an ETS bus. You've definitely experienced this at some point. So you're driving along the Henday at 100 kilometers per hour, and suddenly the driver slams the brakes. What happens to you and why? We have all been through this. So here's the deal. The car, it comes to a stop, but your body was moving forward at 100 kilometers per hour. Guess what? It still wants to move forward at 100 kilometers per hour. So your body is going to continue going forward until it ends up hitting the dashboard or the seatbelt kicks in and kind of restrains you. So we're going to note that down. So by Newton's first law, you want to continue going forward. So you're going to keep moving forward until something stops you, whether that's a seatbelt or you hit your face on the dash. And this is also one of the reasons, or one of the primary reasons why seatbelts were invented. The whole purpose of the seatbelt is that as you start to go forward, if you go forward at a very large acceleration, many of you have dealt with this already, your seatbelt kind of locks in place. That is meant to hold you in place to prevent you from moving forward. Because back in the olden days when seatbelts either weren't part of the vehicle or you were not legally required to wear them, if people got into collisions, there was always that risk of somebody essentially being a projectile and going out the window. The seatbelt is meant to prevent that because it saves your life, because going out the window certainly doesn't help you live, and it also protects anybody who would be in the path of you as a projectile should you end up outside of the window. So as much as people like to complain about seatbelts not being comfortable and all that, well, they're very important and they're very life-saving. And basically what they're doing is to prevent you being a victim of Newton's first law. Now this last one, this is something we'll explore a little bit more later in the course when we start to talk about circular motion and misconceptions. And this is also something that we've dealt with a little bit, or you've dealt with just in the real life. So you're passing in a car suddenly starts to take a sharp right curve. What happens to you and why? Again, we're going to take this from the perspective, since these are done in Canada, we're going to assume that this is a Canadian vehicle, so the driver's on the left side and the passenger's on the right. What I want to do is I'm going to kind of sketch a top-down view of the car doing the curve. Bear with me, it's going to be ugly sketching. So here's the car, we have the driver and the passenger. So the car is eventually going to make this turn around the road. So it's going to start to slowly make this turn. So yeah, bear with me on this. So this is the car taking the curve. Now, most of us know if you're the passenger in this vehicle and it's taking a sharp right curve, the passenger knows that they start to move towards the driver. So what's happening is the passenger is going to move up towards the person driving the car. That's good if you know that. I would expect most people to know that just because, again, teenagers, you don't necessarily drive all that safe. You're a little wild. Again, besides the point. Let's look at this from the physics point of view. What somebody would likely say is, oh, I've been pushed, or I feel like I'm being pushed. If you're talking about forces and all that, I need you to kind of just get that out of your brain right now. Especially if you start bringing up this centrifugal force, definitely get that out of your brain. Like, that is a huge delete. Centrifugal, oh, don't even get me started on that. All that's happening is your body is obeying Newton's first law. That's it. When you're driving straight before you hit the curve, when the car is turning, the car itself is turning, but your body still wants to go in that straight direction. So your body is still always interested in trying to go straight forward. What happens though is now that the car is turning and you want to go straight, what ends up happening is that your body, respecting Newton's first law, it's going to start to move towards the driver. It's not an actual force that's pushing you there. It's just your body's attempting to move in a straight line. It hasn't registered that the car is curving yet. And that's it. There's no force. You're just obeying Newton's first law. So you want to continue moving in a straight line with respect to Newton's first law. Back to Newton's first law. And I'm going to put this in brackets because it's really important. There is no force pushing you. We're going to triple exclamation mark that because that's really important. If you say there's a force pushing you, if I'm not the one who's your physics teacher, I can certainly guarantee your physics teacher is going to be really, really, really mad at you. So don't talk about centrifugal forces or any of that stuff. And this whole idea of looking at inertia and Newton's first law, this is something that people who make automobiles, they have to consider all the time, and they're considering it from a safety lens. Because like if you are going to go forward if a car stops, we want to try and brace you for impact, or at least lessen the impact. Hence why we have seat belts, and also one of the reasons we have airbags. And as you may or may not know, cars back in the day didn't have to have seat belts, and even when they did get seat belts, you weren't actually required to wear them. Now, you are legally required to wear seatbelts, and if you're somebody who's a little hesitant on doing that, I assure you, please wear them. They are extraordinarily important in terms of safety, and they may prevent you from being seriously harmed if you are in a collision. As somebody who was in a collision as a child and didn't wear a seatbelt, I got really lucky, and after that, I started wearing my seatbelt every day after that. Don't learn the lesson the hard way on that one. So buckle up.